Former Vice President Mike Pence says he is still deciding whether to appeal a judge's ruling that he must testify before a panel investigating January 6th.
That's right. He said in an interview with Newsmax yesterday that he has nothing to hide, but he did not say if he would, in fact, comply with the judge's order. Special counsel Jack Smith issued the subpoena back in February. You may recall Pence has argued that he should not have to testify because of his role in the legislative branch.
Let's bring in Major Garrett, our chief Washington correspondent, to talk more about this. Major, it's interesting because if a special counsel appointed by the Department of Justice is subpoenaing a former vice president and he says, no, I don't have to go, you would imagine that this is something that can only be adjudicated by, I don't know, the Supreme Court. What are the chances that this could make it there?
So the former vice president has said that he very well may take this question of whether he has to testify and under what conditions all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, I apologize in advance. This is going to sound like a law school symposium, and I'm going to try to go through it as simply as I can.
Yep.
The Trump attorney said former Vice President Pence shouldn't have to testify because he is covered by blanket executive privilege. The judge overseeing this matter rejected that claim. So that's one down, one loss. The vice president didn't exert executive privilege. He said that because on January 6th, he was at the United States Senate supervising the certifying of that 2020 presidential race, he was the president of the Senate. Therefore, he is protected by something called the speech and debate clause, meaning he was part of the legislative branch, and his activities on January 6th shouldn't have to be subject to question or subpoena or anything like that because he was effectively part of the legislative branch. The judge overseeing this case agreed in part with the former vice president, but not entirely. So the question for the vice president and his attorneys is, do you take that as a small victory, understanding that some of your testimony will be shielded, or do you appeal to a higher court and risk a higher court saying, you know what, the speech and debate clause doesn't protect you at all. You have to answer all the questions. The same question is also true for the special counsel. Do you appeal this so you get all your questions asked and answered, or do you take this basically two-thirds victory and wait to see what the vice president does? All this sounds like a lot of law school legalisms, but it's very important because from the special counsel's perspective, few people within the Trump White House know more about what led up to the president's decision-making or lack thereof on January 6th than the former vice president, because he was subject to intense personal pressure from the former president to interfere in the certification of that 2020 election. And getting to how that interference was articulated, what the former president knew and what his motives were, the special counsel believes the former vice president can answer best of all. That's why this legal fight continues.
Speaking of fights, Major, I want to ask you about solutions and potential coming togethers, because you spoke with Congressman Dusty Johnson, who's a member of the bipartisan House Problem Solvers Caucus for the takeout. What issues did he say this group of bipartisan Republicans and Democrats might be on the way to solving right now?
So there are about 70 members of that Problem Solvers, and it's divided between Republicans and Democrats. So Dusty Johnson really does have a perspective and a proven track record about trying to find bipartisan compromises. But on this debt ceiling crisis, he said that's not going to happen unless the Biden White House agrees to negotiate with the majority party, the House Republicans, over some alterations to future federal spending. He said the votes are never going to be there, and if the Biden White House believes they can just drive Republicans into a compromised position where a debt ceiling increase is passed without any changes to future federal spending, that's not going to happen. And he said there's a 2-week break that Congress will go on starting at the end of this week for Passover and for Easter. After that, there'll be 6 weeks before the United States defaults. And he said, we are reaching a very critical crisis period of time. And he urged the White House to get off of what he regards as a non-compromise, non-realistic perspective on this, and at least open negotiations with House Republicans. He said, absent that, the prospects for a default are higher than ever.
The timeline's really powerful, isn't it?
Yeah. And also for tonight on Red and Blue, Major, you spoke with Congressman Ro Khanna. He represents effectively part of Silicon Valley and where SVB is located. And you spoke with him about his decision not to run for Senate and to instead endorse Congresswoman Barbara Lee in that race. Let's quickly, for our viewers, just play a snippet of what he said.
I've admired her since I was in law school when she cast the lone vote to give a blank check to President Bush on the Afghanistan war that led to 20 years of a war and terror in this country. I believe that a lot of Bernie progressives and others will rally around her.
What else did he tell you about why he's not running?
So he said he's not running because he believes he can do a lot of really good, important work for the progressive cause in the House of Representatives, battle against the majority Republican Party. But the truth is, Ro Khanna decided that the progressive lane in that Democratic race for the Senate nomination already crowded by Katie Porter and Barbara Lee, and a third progressive would probably divide that vote and give it to what he described as the current frontrunner, Adam Schiff. And he heard Ro Khanna mention Bernie, Democrats, Bernie supporters. Well, he would know a fair amount about that. He was one of the co-chairs of Bernie Sanders' run for the nomination in 2020. And so Ro Khanna has deep roots within that progressive party movement. And he said Barbara Lee isn't the favorite now, but he believes will consolidate that support not only within California, but nationwide, and have a better than even chance to emerge as one of the two candidates from that Democratic primary.
Interesting stuff. Viewers will want to hear more from your interview, and they can tune to Red and Blue tonight for some of it. Major Garrett, always great to chat with you. Thanks very much.